Good afternoon, friends. I'm Wendy Kane.
And I'm Sharon Hulihan.
And at our meeting in Newtown, we are affectionately known as the Graveyard Girls. That's because about 10 years ago, we became the burial ground liaisons charged with maintaining the records of the lives of the approximately 600 friends buried at our meeting house. It is a labor of love, and during our tenure, we've come to know many of the amazing friends who were well known during their lifetimes, but whose names and accomplishments have been lost to history. In our talk today, we're going to focus on the Newtown friends who were involved in the founding and early days of what was originally known as Friends Boarding Home, or just the Home for short. We will share their stories, and we hope you leave with an appreciation of these people who came before you. The Quaker movement began in England in 1682, and from its earliest time, friends were expected to take care of their members. That meant providing education and job training for the young and care and comfort for the elderly. 200 years later, at the 1895 annual meeting of the Quakers of Philadelphia yearly meeting, a minute was adopted in response to a concern raised by a friend. A valued friend presented a concern relative to a home for aged and infirm friends of limited means. These friends should be provided for when the little they may have will secure them in their declining years greater care and more comfort for them than they, individually, can procure for themselves. A year later, in 1896, the yearly meeting received $200,000 from Anna T. Jeans to assist in the establishment and maintenance of boarding homes for the aged and infirm amongst friends and those in sympathy with us. Anna lived in Philadelphia and was the sole heir to her family's fortune. To honor her family and in recognition of the myriad social ills of the time, she was determined to give away her entire fortune to better humanity, which she did over the last 13 years of her life. This concern resonated deeply with everyone, and with the promise of funding, 8 friends from Buck's quarterly meeting were named on a yearly meeting committee to consider the matter and report back at next year's annual sessions. Among the 8 was Newtown friend Isaac Eyre. Isaac was born in 1819, the youngest of the 10 children of shipbuilder Isaac Eyre and Eleanor Cooper. He grew up on a farm in Middletown. He remained on the family farm and eventually moved to a farm near Newtown. At the time of the Civil War, as a Quaker, he refused to pay the required militia tax. As a result, the local constable went to his property and, with tears in his eyes, because he thought that Isaac was a noble man and he was loath to follow through with his charge, took a certain yield from Isaac's crops in payment for the unpaid tax. Now, Isaac took active interest in the affairs of the community. He was a promoter and builder of the railroad between Philadelphia and Newtown, as well as other rail projects. He was also one of the founders of George School, and it is largely through his influence that the school was located near Newtown. He married 2 Elizabeths, Elizabeth Knight, with whom he had 2 children, and Elizabeth Smith. He and Elizabeth number 2 came to live at Friends Boarding Home. He died in 1904, and all 3 are buried at Newtown Meeting. With the information and guidance provided by Isaac Eyre, friends in Buck's Quarter quickly ascertained that it would be very beneficial to the community to establish a boarding home and the opportunity presented itself when Dr. Letty A. Smith, a Quaker physician living on South Chancellor Street in Newtown, decided that she was ready to retire. She offered to turn her substantial house into an institution, renting the building for $300 a year and agreeing to pay the taxes and keep the property in repair. She invited her friends, Mary Simpson and Annie Knowles, to be fellow boarders and hired David and Agnes Palmer and their daughter Elizabeth as staff. And on May 3rd, 1897, Friends Boarding Home was open for business. So, who was Dr. Letty Smith? Letty Ann Smith was born in 1816 to Joseph Smith and Mary Betts Smith. She was raised a Quaker and as a child attended Wrightstown Meeting. She lived on the family farm with her parents until 1857, when her father decided to leave farming. No longer having to work on the family farm, Letty decided to move out west for a time, where she became interested in electricity and how it could be used to treat human diseases. After her father's death in 1861, she decided to study medicine at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, graduating in 1867 at the age of 51. She moved to Newtown, purchased the house at 18 South Chancellor Street, and became the first female physician in Newtown, specializing in, quote, chronic diseases such as dyspepsia, liver and lung diseases, and diseases of women. Letty was not only a physician, but an inventor as well. Her labor-saving butter worker was patented in 1853. It was described as a useful improvement and is well worthy the attention of dairymen generally. Although none of her butter workers survive today, a salesman's sample of her invention is on permanent display at the Mercer Museum in Doylestown. So more residents joined the three ladies. One of these was Garrett Van Sant Hunter, who led a colorful life. He was born in Newtown to Mary Van Sant and Jonathan Hunter. He was one of 6 children. He fought in the Civil War and served as a conductor for the Pennsylvania Railroad. For 17 years, he traveled all over the U.S. and Canada as a circus attaché for Barnum and Bailey. After his retirement in July 1897, he became the 5th resident of Friends' home. In 1898, he applied for membership in the Society of Friends and became a member of Newtown Meeting. He lived happily at the home for many years, and after being bedridden for 2.5 years, he died in November 1920 at the age of 85. Fun fact, in 1916, he was a pallbearer at Isaac Ayer's funeral. From the beginning, the Board of Managers who oversaw the care of the home knew that the arrangement of renting the property from Dr. Letty was only temporary, and they would need to come up with a more permanent solution. And about a year after the first residents moved into Letty's house, there was a disagreement between Letty and the board that made finding a new building even more urgent. Now, although the reason is lost to history, Letty apparently was unhappy with some aspect of the agreement with the Board of Managers and sent them a letter demanding them to, quote, vacate the property now occupied by the home by 9th month 1st, 1898. So the board appointed a committee to see what, if any, arrangements could be made towards removing the home from Letty's house. But they couldn't find a suitable property. And since she had signed a lease, they felt they had the legal right to remain. The committee also noted in their minutes that Letty A. Smith is a disturbing element in the household and doesn't desire the assistance of the committee in the matter. After a short discussion, the board delivered a letter to Letty directing her, quote, to leave the home with all her personal belongings within 14 days from this time, and upon her refusal to comply with this demand, that measures be taken for her removal, and that upon her removal, we settle with her at the rate of $3 per week for board for the time she has been in the home. The letter was signed by none other than Isaac Eyre. The matter was referred to the overseers, now called the Care and Counsel Committee, of Newtown Meeting. After careful discernment, they wrote, "We, the Committee of Overseers of Newtown Preparative Meeting, to whom has been referred the differences existing between Dr. Letty A. Smith, one of our members, and the Bucks Quarterly Meetings Committee on Boarding Home, after carefully considering the subject, bearing in mind the high character of our Christian friends, kindly advise the committee to withdraw its notice and recede from its determination to have her, the said Letty A. Smith, removed from said home in 14 days. We are equally of the opinion she should withdraw her notice to the committee to evacuate the home 9th month 1st, 1898 at once." They ended the letter with, "We sincerely hope these differences may be settled in the spirit of love and to avoid any outward scandal." And since I didn't know about this incident until I went to Friends Historical Library and read the actual minutes of the board meeting, it appears they did avoid any outward scandal. Both parties agreed to abide by the agreement proposed by the Newtown overseers. But it became crystal clear that a different location needed to be found. Enter Judge Edward M. Paxson to the rescue. He became interested in helping the home and offered to donate $10,000 to purchase land and construct a new building, which he would give as a gift in memory of his father and mother, Thomas and Ann Johnson Paxson. Edward M. Paxson was born in 1824. He was educated in Quaker schools in Buckingham, and by age 18, he learned the art of printing, publishing and editing first the Newtown Journal and later the Philadelphia Daily News. Later, he studied law with Henry Chapman in Doylestown and was admitted to the bar in Bucks County, Pennsylvania in 1850. He practiced law in Philadelphia for a time and then, in 1874, was elected to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. He served as an associate justice until January 1889, when he was elevated to Chief Justice. He was married twice, both Marys. He died in 1905 at the age of 81 and is buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. A lot was purchased from Emmer K. Janney for $2,100, who was willing to sell provided the entrance might face his ancestral home on Congress Street. This request caused some consternation as the preferred front was on Center Avenue. In true Quaker fashion, they came to unity by creating two entrances to the home. Judge Paxson wanted the quarter to raise an additional $10,000 for an endowment, but given the economic uncertainty of the time, that didn't happen. And in the end, Judge Paxson contributed the entire cost of the building, which came to $28,000. The new building was opened on March 3rd, 1900. The pleasure of the committee was recorded in these words, quote, "The move to the new building was in most ways a joyous affair, for the new home had so many advantages that the old one lacked. Electric lights, improved sanitary conditions, and heating plant. Some thought it was like living in a glass house, so light and airy did it seem." Unmentioned in the comparison were the accommodations for 34 people in the new building, a vast increase over Dr. Letty's house. The fee per boarder at the time was $3 to $4 per week, with an entrance fee of $50. So that's a brief history of how Friends Home was first established. Now, let's dig deeper into some of the people who were residents or who served the community over the next 100 years or so.
George Walton was a well-regarded educator and the longest-serving head of school at George School. That's all I knew when I first started my research. By the way, the information we're presenting today is based on primary documents that include newspaper articles, birth and death certificates, census records, and diaries found online or from research libraries. Obituaries are another great place to gather information, and there's a beautiful one in Friends Journal written by another Newtown Meeting member and George School teacher William Hulihan. He wrote about George Walton, "The educator, more than most of us, lives in the realm of imperfection. That is especially true of life in a boarding school, yet the tensions in a school community are also full of promise. Every year at commencement, when he called each one of the 130 plus graduates by his or her full name, everyone realized George School's headmaster knew them as well as he had known their parents or even grandparents. He went to their homes, attended weddings and funerals, and shared meals at quarterly meeting. He loved spirited discussions. It is said his vocabulary employed the question mark more frequently than the exclamation point. His leadership in Philadelphia Yearly Meeting and in Friends General Conference injected a note of spirituality that was the fruit of silent contemplations. Still, he never presented himself as aloof, which at the time was often associated with high office. When he took the risk of inviting a sizable number of foreign teachers from Europe in the mid-1930s to join his faculty, it was more than the calculated risk of which he used to speak. It was an act of faith to give an opening to untried strangers, and his vision of the unity of all men everywhere moved him to do so. Let me tell you all the other things I didn't know. I didn't know he was one of the founders of the Pendle Hill Quaker Study Center. I didn't know the extent to which he was involved with the American Friends Service Committee. AFSC was founded by Philadelphia Quakers in 1917, right at the start of World War I, as an alternative to military service and to serve the civilian victims. I didn't know that in December 1938, he went on a secret trip to Nazi Germany with AFSC founder Rufus Jones and Robert Yarnall. Jones wrote in an article about their experiences and said of the Nazis, "Our struggle is not with the people themselves, but with an intangible set of entrenched ideas. They were there to provide assistance to the Jews, and against all odds, they were granted permission." When he returned, George shared his experiences at a special event held at the meeting house in front of a packed audience with people there from miles around. I didn't know that after he retired in 1948, he would have a hand in healing the Quaker split or schism between the Orthodox and Hicksite Quakers. He joined forces again with Rufus Jones, and together with others, they sought to find common ground. As someone committed to including young people in all forums, he asked a young friends group to research the reason for the original split. The schism in Philadelphia dated back to 1827. And when they reported back that no one could remember, he took that as a good sign that they would be able to find a way forward. The work was slow and methodical, but I think his whole life, especially his experience in Germany and at George School, prepared him for this moment. He was part of a collective that worked toward finding the right words and actions to help folks examine their own entrenched ideas and to consider with love a future together. I had no idea George Walton was involved with the final work of the reconciliation process, which was having the two groups work together to create a new book of discipline. This led to the laying down of the Quaker Book of Discipline and developing the first Faith and Practice, published in 1955. He also served as clerk of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting twice, and back home here in Newtown, served as clerk of worship and ministry twice. George Walton was a Quaker statesman who committed his life to young adults, education, and Quaker institutions. He was a charismatic man of faith, a deep thinker, a risk taker, and invested his faith in the young and those who served them. He knew the value of building community and strengthening the ties between Quakers. After his wife died in 1963, George Walton moved into Friends boarding home. 6 years later, in November 1969, while walking along Route 532, he was hit by a car and died of his injuries. He had been on his way to an ecumenical meeting and lost his way. Dr. Jesse Packer was one of the Friends Home's physicians. My interest in Jesse Packer started a few summers ago when I received an email from someone suggesting Jesse Packer was a World War I veteran. I knew that wasn't true, but wondered, why did they think that? I looked through the military records online and verified he did not serve. I found his draft card and saw his answer to the following question. Do you claim exemption from the draft? If yes, explain. He writes, yes, religious beliefs, Society of Friends. That's when I started wondering, is Jesse a conscientious objector? I found a shipping manifest under the Army Transport Service with his name on it. This document identifies the people they are transporting as casual civilians. After staring at the page some more, I saw cost of passage to be charged ARC. Then it dawned on me, ARC may stand for the American Red Cross. I think there's a connection. I'm set out to find a passport. Ta-da! Page 1 of his passport asks, what country are you going to? He writes, France. And what is the object of work? He writes, reconstruction work for the American Friends Service Committee, AFSC. He further states he's scheduled to leave on the Rochambeau on September 1st, 1970. Page 2 of his passport is where you have a person you know vouch for you. It's called the identification section. Who signs for Jesse? Henry Cadbury, one of the founders of AFSC, who he's known all of 6 weeks. It's dated August 27th, 1917. Page 3 is completed by the draft board, and they restate the grounds of Jesse's exemption being his religious beliefs. Furthermore, they say, the War Department has no objection to issue of a passport. That's dated August 28th. And 3 days later, he boards the Rochambeau. The idea of getting married in Paris to me sounds very romantic. When Wendy and I first started gathering primary documents to create the database we wanted to have for our graveyard, we noticed they were married in Paris and thought, oh, lovely, paying no mind to the date or what was going on in the world at the time. Jesse and Mary Pancoast got married on August 27th, 1918, 3 months before the end of World War I. Let's focus a bit on our bride, Mary Pancoast. I'm able to locate 2 passports for her. The first one she used on her way to France. Remember, on page 1, they asked, what is the object of her visit? She lists her occupation as social settlement worker with American Friends Reconstruction. There are several letters that accompany this passport. One was written by our friend George Walton and another from her employer, AFSC, certifying that she's a duly appointed member of the American Friends Reconstruction Unit of the Red Cross to engage in relief and reconstruction work in France, and is under the orders of this committee to sail for France as soon as possible. Mary's going to need a new passport when she returns home that sports her married name, right? This time, it's Jesse completing the identification section, claiming he's known her for 13 years. So he's 28, she's 27. If he's known her for 13 years, I'll give you one guess where they met. George School. As I said earlier, I didn't know a whole lot about the American Friends Service Committee. Knowing Newtown Meeting has a nice library, I went over and discovered they actually had a lot of books about AFSC to choose from, and for some reason I was drawn to this one, The Answered with Love. This book is a true story made up of over 100 letters exchanged between Miss Mary Peabody, a young activist from Radcliffe, and Mr. Leslie Hodson, a committed pacifist from Harvard. It was through Mary that he found out about AFSC. They had just started dating when he was accepted, and through these letters we learn about his experience. We also get a sense of what life must have been like for our Jesse Backer, because the 3rd chapter is called On Board the Rochambeau. Imagine my surprise when I picked up the book and read, we had a Quaker wedding here the other day. A Mary Pancoast married a Dr. Jesse Backer, to whom she had been engaged in America. He describes the ceremony, the vows, the silence, and the reception where there was ice cream and cake. The war ends, and we know that in 1919, Jesse and Mary returned to Newtown safe and sound, and according to the 1920 census, they are living at 231 South Chancellor Street. Check out this photo. You can see this house has 2 entrances. One was for his home, the other, the medical practice. What can the 1930 census tell us? We see they've moved to a larger house down the road to 35 South Chancellor Street, and there are 3 children now living in the house, with 4-year-old adopted daughter Jane, a 20-month-old adopted son John, and a 2-month-old David, not adopted. But there's no mention of Mary. Where's Mary? I quickly refer back to the records and discover baby David was born January 11th, 1930, and see that Mary died 13 days later on January 24th, at age 38, from what I'm assuming were complications of childbirth. It frustrates me that I can't find an obituary online. I head over to the Newtown Historic Society on Mercer Street and find out it's the only place that has a copy of the Newtown Enterprise. Her obituary talks of her service in AFSC during the war and that she was an active member of many organizations of the town seeking to improve the community. Obituaries during this time period were written after the funeral and mentioned those who spoke during the service. One of the speakers was George Walton. It's an odd feeling to feel heavy-hearted for people I've never met. As informative as the obituary was, I felt left hanging. I wanted more of an acknowledgement of her passing. Our Quaker records and meeting for business minutes rarely reflect the events of the day, and that was the case here. I asked my friends at Newtown Historic Society for help, and they delivered. They found her mentioned on the front page of the newspaper the week after her obituary was listed. It captures the heartbreak. It says, "Profound sorrow was expressed by the members in full realization of the irreparable loss that the organization had sustained by the death of Mary P. Packer, who during her life in Newtown was such a faithful and valuable member." We return to the 1940 census and see Jesse's left with 3 children under 5 and his wife's aunt stepping in to assist with childcare. Luckily, a few years later, our Jesse marries again to another woman named Mary. Take a look at the 1940 census, and we see the children are now ages 14, 11, and 10. And they've added 2 kids of their own, Mary and Richard, ages 6 and 5. Jesse had a wonderful life. He loved his family, understood the sacrifices his father made by moving them to Newtown, away from the only place they ever lived in Ohio, solely so that he and his sister could attend George School. He met his first wife there and was a conscientious objector and worked for the American Friends Service Committee. He lived his values. He was the town doctor, once served as the president of the Bucks County Medical Society, was the Friends home doctor, and continued to make house calls long after doing so fell by the wayside. He was loved and respected by his family and community. Mary died September 22nd, 1970, and 20 days later, Jesse died October 12th, 1970. Kingdon Swain was part of the Friends home community. In fact, he was a historian who developed a niche for writing about the history of several Quaker organizations. He wrote a book about the 50-year history of Newtown Friends School, a book about the centennial history of George School, and he wrote about the centennial history of this very place, Friends Home, from 1897 to 1997. He was a special man, and I want you to know more about him. Kingdon was born and raised on the campus of George School, the son of teachers. After George School, he went on to Harvard University, majoring in economics. After graduating, he enlisted in World War II, serving in the Army and rising to the rank of captain. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge with General Patton's Third Army. He received both the Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. In 1946, he began a 20-year career working for the State Department as a Foreign Service diplomat. He was stationed in England, China, Canada, Japan, and Burma. Fluent in Japanese, he once served as the translator for the Japanese Prime Minister while at a White House luncheon, where he was seated between Jackie Kennedy and Mamie Eisenhower. In 1967, he returned home to Newtown and began teaching at Bucks County Community College. And to capture the next momentous event of his life, let me read this announcement in Friends Journal from March 1970. The first Democratic mayor in the 285-year history of Newtown, Pennsylvania, is a Quaker. Kingdon Swain, a member of Newtown Monthly Meeting, is professor of political science at Bucks County Community College. This next part hints at Kingdon's intellect, his optimism, and commitment to community. And we get a glimpse of his philosophy of public service. Mayor Kingdon Swain, in his very first official remarks, said that he would emphasize creative cooperation and that he looks forward to a new era that will require a politics of innovation, a politics of open, creative debate, a politics of effective communication between citizen and official. Kingdon later became the Bucks County treasurer and was involved in a variety of Quaker circles. He was clerk of Newtown Friends Meeting, clerk of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, and served on the board of the American Friends Service Committee. Between his pension from the State Department and his income from teaching, Kingdon found himself accruing wealth. He gave serious introspection to this and began a project questioning the topic of stewardship of wealth so he could learn from the experience of others. Ever the educator, he wrote a Pendle Hill pamphlet that explores principles of stewardship and addresses his own self-discovery and includes a self-assessment skill at the end. John Woolman's view of stewardship is to turn all we possess into a channel of universal love becomes the business of our lives. A modern expression of Woolman's view appears in the Shakertown Pledge, which includes 9 points, which I believe shaped Kingdon's beliefs. He tithed 10% of his income to charity and was committed to living below his means with the goal of using his wealth to impact the causes he cared about. Throughout his life, he gave generously to Newtown Meeting, George School, and Newtown Friends School. Kingdon owned the house next door or on the same block as Friends' home on Center Avenue, and made an arrangement that in his later years, he would become a part of the community in exchange for the gift of his house. His personal choice of simplicity created the opportunity for the community he cared for to afford enduring improvements to their facilities. A coworker captured him perfectly. He was always trying to improve places.
The late 1970s may have been the zenith of the popularity of the Friends boarding home. Newtown friend Darlington Styer quipped, "We shall all be 100 before we can get in." Several expansion options were considered, including buying neighboring properties, but none of them worked out. So Darlington and Helen Styer decided to open the way with an offer of their own that was a distant echo of Dr. Letty Smith's founding inspiration. In October 1979, they invited the home into their home. It was a spacious 18th century fieldstone farmhouse on Lower Darlington Road, about a mile northeast of the home. The offer included the 5 surrounding acres, ample land for additional housing, parking, and other amenities. Surrounding the plot on 3 sides was one of the apple orchards that had made the Styer name synonymous with apples and cider. Helen said, "We just thought it would be more pleasant for people to live together here than living on their own in a single apartment." The Styers' gift was followed by a $95,000 donation by Annabelle of Bristol Meeting and gifts from many individuals as well as from most of the meetings in Bucks Quarter. Friends Village opened on April 1st, 1981. Darlington and Helen became residents. Darlington lived until 1990, Helen until 1996. In a memorial minute by Newtown Friends, it was written of Darlington: his love for people and his sense of responsibility led him to his tireless efforts in the building of the community at Friends Village. Because he was so modest and self-effacing, most of what Darlington Styer did will not be credited to him, except in the memories of those who were directly affected. Well, we're now up to the present, and it's time to wrap this up by taking you back to the beginning. At the end of the 19th century, a woman stood up in a Quaker meeting for business to voice a concern for aged and infirm friends of limited means. Her ministry was spoken and released. She sat down. At the time, she did not know that she had planted a seed that would take root, grow, and flourish into what we now know as Friends Village. That hundreds, perhaps thousands of people would benefit from her words. In Newtown alone, there are dozens of friends, many of whom were members of the local Quaker communities, like Newtown Friends Meeting and George School, who were either residents or involved with the administration of the home. Friends Village will hopefully continue to be a resource for anyone who is looking for an affordable, supportive, and kind community. So the message I want to leave with you today is to speak your truth, my friends. You never know the far-reaching effects your words may have.